Boldwood presents Taken, written by Danielle Ramsay and read by Helen Keeley. What loneliness is more lonely than distrust? Middlemarch, George Eliot. Minds that are ill at ease are agitated by both hope and fear. Metamorphosis, Ovid. Prologue. Thursday, 3:03 a.m. I felt groggy and disorientated, unsure of who or where I was. The compulsion to descend back into the numbing black abyss I had surfaced from was overwhelming. But something didn't feel right. I gasped as I suddenly lurched to one side. I gripped onto the edge of what I realized was a wooden bed, terrified I would fall. I tried to swallow back the bile that had risen to the back of my raw throat, but my tongue was too swollen and my mouth too dry. I struggled to open my eyes, but the explosion of fireworks in my head thwarted my attempt, the booming, throbbing, accompanied by strobing white lights making me cry out in agony. I lay perfectly still, holding my breath, fearful of another onslaught. When the pounding started easing off, I felt myself disappearing into oblivion. But again, the feeling that something was wrong hit me, louder and more forceful this time. Confused, I tried to remember who I was. Nothing came. Who are you? I couldn't recall. I tried to swallow. Again, failed. I forced myself to think, despite the flashes of searing white pain that tried to block my quest. But my mind was blank. I couldn't get the neurons to connect, to charge up and retrieve the information I needed. The electrical storm in my head had short-circuited everything. Something had happened to me. Something terrible. But what? What had happened to me? What had happened to... Eli. The name came to me, calling out ever so softly, teasing me, tormenting me, terrifying me. Eli. Eli. Elijah. The room suddenly dipped to the opposite side as my stomach flipped in protest. I fought the urge to heave. Failing, I leaned over the bed and dry-retched. Panting, I lay back against the pillow and wiped the spit from my lips with my hand, giving in to the exhaustion that swept over me. Then I remembered. Oh my God, Eli. His car seat was empty. He was gone. Oh God, no. No, he wasn't gone. He was on the bed. Remember? You crawled into bed to be near him, to hold him, to keep him safe. Groaning with exertion, I reached my hand out for him, fumbling around for the reassurance of his body next to mine. My stomach protested with every movement I made, as did my thumping head and feverish, aching skin. I groped blindly behind, hoping to silence the sense of disquiet screaming at me that I had committed my worst fear. Terror took hold when my hand touched something. I snatched it away, in horror. Eli? Sheer dread filled me, as cold sweat drenched my body. Panic made me fumble for the light switch beside the small bedside unit. My hand knocked something over. I heard it hit the carpet with a heavy, dull thud before rolling across the floor. I blinked, repeatedly in reaction to the bright bulb above the bed as my eyes slowly acclimatized to the painful intrusion. It took me a few moments to realize where I was. And then, I remembered why. I caught sight of the unused twin cabin bed opposite. My eyes drifted down to the floor, surprised to see an empty wine bottle and the remnants of red wine staining the light beige carpet. I felt my stomach twist and turn in revulsion at the sight. I couldn't remember drinking wine, but the bottle on the floor and plastic tumbler suggested otherwise. The empty blister pack of pills lying alongside the discarded bottle came into focus, adding to the incriminating evidence. I understood now why I felt so unwell, so nauseous. Oh God, what did you do? My heavy, barely responsive limbs and foggy, pounding head provided all the empirical evidence I needed. I had swallowed innumerable sedatives with a bottle of wine. My skin felt hot and clammy as I fought the urge to retch again. Why? Why would you do that? Why? It didn't make sense. None of this made sense to me. I was perched along the edge of the bed, too terrified to turn around. The world was spinning out of control around me as I clung on frantically, praying that I was still unconscious and this was all my cruel imagination. It's not real. It can't be. You wouldn't have washed down all those pills with a bottle of wine. Why? Why would you do that? But a familiar feeling began to take hold. Dark despair. I could sense it, descending upon me. Ravenous, restless, and ruthless, longing to reawaken the memory of... I stopped myself. Tears filled my eyes, slipping down my cheeks. What did you do? I couldn't bring myself to look. I already knew something was wrong. Very wrong. To look would finalize it, imprinting it to memory forever, just like... Again I stopped myself. I reached my hand behind me once more, seeking reassurance that everything was all right, that I was not fully awake and had imagined it. Yes, that had to be it. You imagined it. I had catastrophized when nothing was wrong, that the wine and pills weren't an ominous sign that I had... I emitted a muffled sob as my trembling hand brushed against something. His hand. It was cold, unnaturally so. Eli? No. No! I lay perfectly still for a moment, my breath shallow, not wanting to register what was going through my mind. What did you do, Alice? I ran. That's what I did. I ran away. But I knew I couldn't trust myself, that Eli wasn't safe around me. Yet hadn't Dr. Samuels assured me it was all in my mind? She had said I would never act upon my thoughts. Harmful thoughts, Alice. Own it. You obsessed about hurting him. You know that you couldn't trust yourself. I could feel my body trembling, as my mind wildly tried to assuage the suffocating guilt. I breathed out shakily, unaware I had been holding my breath. I realized my hand was still touching his smooth skin. So cold. So lifeless. So unnatural. But still I couldn't bring myself to look. To look would make it real. I didn't want this to be real, not again. What did you do, Alice? What did you do? The empty wine bottle rolled accusatorily as the room mercilessly dipped. No! I wouldn't hurt him. Dr. Samuels had promised me. She'd promised that it was all in my head. Tricky, sneaky, poisonous thoughts that weren't really mine, that it all stemmed from what happened 1 year earlier before Eli. But what were you running from, Alice? What? I tried to block out the email on my husband's computer that I had secretly opened 2 days ago from a psychiatrist explaining the mental health assessment that was due to take place later today, the 24th of October. Horrified, I had stared at the stark, factual words addressed to him, the man I trusted and loved, detailing that I was to be sectioned under the Mental Health Act and held for 4 weeks against my will at a private psychiatric hospital. It described itself as a luxury retreat from the world, an 18th century mansion set in acres of private landscaped gardens with a lake bordered by woodland, offering residents tranquility and peace. However, its setting and exquisite accommodation were just a facade, hiding the brutal reality of the high-walled, gated premises with surveillance cameras and locked doors, preventing anyone from leaving. I knew the place well, as I had stayed there once before. But that intervention had been a year back, so why now? Because your husband has plans. Plans that don't involve you. I recalled the anonymous text I'd received on Tuesday morning from a concerned friend. That text had shattered my world. They knew things about my life, my husband, that I didn't know. Until they told me. They informed me as a concerned friend that my husband had plans for the future that didn't involve me. I was a burden to him, a problem he no longer wanted to deal with. It was an easy fix. Get rid of me on the pretext I was mentally unwell and a danger to myself, and I stopped abruptly. I would never hurt Eli. Never. Surely he knew that. Hadn't he talked to Dr. Samuels? Or maybe he had, and that was the reason for the sudden mental health assessment. Perhaps I had said something to her in our last appointment suggesting I was a threat to Eli. After all our sessions, I had undone everything she had helped me process and work through this past year. Oh God. Is it happening again? Are you too unwell to even realize? Holding my breath, I forced myself to turn around and look at Eli. To prove to myself that it was all in my head. That my baby was fine. I was fine. Tom was wrong. The psychiatrist who stated I was mentally unwell and needed to be sectioned was wrong. There was nothing wrong with me. Oh my God. Alice? I stared and stared, not entirely understanding what I was seeing. It wasn't Eli next to me, it was Noah? I let out a guttural, wounded, strangled sound as I was thrown back to that morning, precisely a year ago, when my life changed forever. Chapter 1. 1 year earlier. No, I cried, holding fiercely onto him. It felt as if the small hospital room was closing in on me. Please, Alice. They need to take him now. Unable to look up at him, at any of them, I shook my head. No, I repeated with more force this time. Tom crouched down in front of me. Darling, he's gone. You need to let them take him. It's time. No, I spat, ready to fight with all my strength to keep my baby. My baby. Oh my God, my baby. Tom nodded at me before looking helplessly at the waiting doctor and nurse. Noah! His name is Noah! I hissed. Tom turned back to me. I know, honey. I know. His voice broke. Hot, frantic tears blinded me, with the knowledge that I had to let my baby go. I had to hand over Noah, whom I had carried for 9 months, only to have him with me for just 8 weeks, 2 days, 9 hours, and 42 minutes. He was born at 12:51 p.m., after a slow, excruciating 3-day labor. I had refused a cesarean section, wanting a natural birth, only to end up in the final minutes with an obstetrician intervening with an emergency ventouse delivery. The vacuum cap failed and was swiftly followed by forceps. Despite Noah's bruised, bloodied, and misshapen head, he was perfect. The most beautiful baby I had ever seen. And as I held his tiny, naked, newborn body against my flesh, I promised, as I stared into his mesmerizing, black, searching eyes, that I would never let anything happen to him. No one would ever hurt him. I would protect him against everything and everyone. But you failed him, Alice. You broke your promise. Open your eyes, Noah. Please just look up at me. Please. Alice. Honey. But I couldn't bring myself to respond. I knew behind the calm, collected, controlled persona of the surgeon he was, that Tom too was being torn apart. The cracked desperation in his voice betrayed him. But my grief was so overwhelming that I had nothing to give him. I barely managed to breathe as it was, without considering how my husband was feeling. He couldn't fix this. And he was a fixer. That's what he did. His precise, steady hands could give a patient back their memories, speech, sight, and ability to move, life itself. Tom Fitzpatrick was one of the leading neurosurgeons in the UK. He had a reputation for doing the impossible, saving lives against the odds. I had fallen in love with this tall, dark-haired American with his infectious smile, who had flown to London from New York Presbyterian Hospital for a 6-month residency. It was an immediate connection. Within months, we fell in love and married. Tom and I met when working together in the operating theatre. Our eyes had lingered on each other for a heart-accelerating beat too long, followed by our fingers touching for a second more than necessary as I passed him a curette. The feeling in those moments was electrifying and beyond anything I had ever experienced. Even though I tried to resist, the attraction was instantaneous. A few weeks later, he asked me out on a date, and despite having no intention of getting involved with anyone for fear of them learning about my past, I agreed, finding his humour and zest for life irresistible. He was the antithesis of my shy, retiring character, and somehow we fitted together like two pieces of a puzzle that neither of us knew was incomplete. We balanced each other perfectly, yet we couldn't have been more different in all aspects, from personality to background. Tom came from an affluent, privileged environment where money wasn't an issue, with 2 parents who were still happily together. He had inherited a generous trust fund from his grandparents at the age of 21, so he never knew what it was to experience financial austerity. He seduced me with surprise weekends in Paris, Rome, Vienna, and Bruges, not that he needed to woo me, as I fell head over heels in love with him the moment we first locked eyes. It was a whirlwind love affair, and Noah followed, much to our delight, a year after our first date. Our son made our love even more special. Now there were 3 of us. Tom, as I had, promised to protect Noah. After all, he was a surgeon and I was a theatre nurse. So how could it be possible that we, of all people, had failed our baby? How? But we had failed. Tom had failed. I had watched, paralysed with terror at the realisation of what was happening, as my husband tried to save our 8-week-old son with chest compressions. He had failed Noah. He had failed me. Maybe if we hadn't travelled to the United States for Tom's interview at Massachusetts General Hospital in Boston, everything would have been all right. We were here because of Tom. He had been transparent when he met me, saying he did not intend to settle in the UK. He needed to return to the States. There was no other option for him. And I had agreed, so desperately in love, to follow him. Or was it that you were so desperate to outrun your past, to pretend it had never happened? Noah's arrival had changed everything. Rather than returning to New York City as Tom had always envisioned, he wanted to offer our son the idyllic childhood he had experienced, growing up in the small coastal town of Marblehead, with his parents close by and Boston less than a 30-minute commute away. Massachusetts General also offered the world's most extensive hospital-based research program, which clinched it for Tom. So we had flown across the Atlantic, the 3 of us, filled with dreams of our future in the States. Oh God, Alice, you should never have brought Noah here. You should never have tried to outrun the past. I gasped, unable to breathe. I couldn't go there. The guilt I felt was too crippling, and now I was paying the price. I had always feared it would catch up with me, as I constantly watched over my shoulder, waiting and anticipating something happening to tear us apart. And now, I brushed my lips against Noah's soft black hair and pressed his body against my chest, willing him to move, to cry out, to show them, me, that we were wrong, that he was still alive. He had to be. God, please. But he was as cold and unresponsive as when I had reached over to wake him for his feed this morning. I had slept later than expected because he hadn't woken up as usual. Or had he and you hadn't heard him? Had you slept through his cries? Tom had left us both sleeping in the guest room of his parents' large house while he went out for his 10-kilometre morning run. When he returned, he showered and then breakfasted with his parents, leaving me to catch up on some much-needed sleep. If only he had checked on Noah and you when he returned from his run, he might have realised something was wrong. But he didn't. If only you had woken up. But you didn't. If only you hadn't. I blocked the torturous thought out, choking back a stifled sob, terrified if I omitted it, the sob would become a scream that would never end. I sensed Tom standing up and stepping away. I then heard muted, low and conspiratorial voices as Tom and the medical team huddled together, deciding how best to act. I didn't care what they said. I just knew that they weren't taking my baby away from me. I couldn't let go of him. Never. Raw, unbridled pain tore at me. I had never felt anguish this intense, this all-consuming before, not even when... The memory was overshadowed by the present. I held Noah into me, not comprehending what had happened or why. All I knew was that it was my fault. If I hadn't fallen asleep, then my baby would still be alive. Why did you fall asleep breastfeeding him, Alice? Why didn't you place him back in his Moses basket? Maybe if you had, he would still be... I suddenly became aware of Tom leaning over me. "Get away," I warned. "Get away from me!" I couldn't let him take my baby. Noah needed me. He was so tiny, so helpless, it was my job to protect him. But you didn't protect him, did you? What happened, Alice? What happened to Noah? Why didn't you keep him safe? My chest tightened as I struggled to catch my breath, to breathe in enough oxygen to stop myself from suffocating in this claustrophobic space. My heart, now dangerously accelerated, threatened to rip apart. I held onto Noah, filled with terror at the knowledge that they wanted to take him from me. My head felt as if it was going to explode from the despair, so desperate and dark that it now consumed me. We were happy, weren't we? And now... Now? There was no now. Alice? Honey? I mumbled something incoherent. "It's time, Alice," my husband told me. I nuzzled Noah's soft, delicate hair again before dragging my head up to meet Tom's dark eyes. They were filled with sadness and fear. Fear of you, perhaps. The medics watched silently from the doorway. Deep, guttural sobs of anguish emitted from me as I held my baby against my aching, swollen, milk-filled breasts, as I pleaded and begged for my husband not to take Noah. I couldn't imagine life without him. Not now. Not ever. All I had now was the past. The what-if scenarios that would drive me insane, tormenting me, taunting me, accusing me of being careless, whispering to me in the darkest hours that I was responsible for what had happened, that I didn't deserve to be happy, that I was a bad person. Oh God, Alice. Now you're paying the price. You knew it would catch up with you one day. I let out a wounded sob. But why Noah? Why my baby? Why not me? Noah was innocent in all of this. Without Noah, I didn't exist. I couldn't exist. I would be torn apart by anguish and regret. Regret that I had done something so terrible, and now the debt had caught up with me. With us. Without understanding how, I realized the day had disappeared, replaced by darkness. We had sped in the ambulance to the hospital this morning. Somehow it was now late evening. Outside the window, soft, glowing streetlights attempted to disperse the blackness of the night. The clock on the pale blue wall ahead indicated that 12 hours had passed without me even realizing. I sobbed in desperation, as Tom managed to lift Noah from my chest. I watched as he held Noah's head in his right hand, delicately cradling him. No, Tom. Give him back to me, please, I begged. Just a little longer. I need more time with him. Tom didn't reply as he stared at our son. I waited as he lowered his head, raised Noah's to his own, and kissed his cheek before holding him tightly against his chest. Tom, please give him back to me! I jumped to my feet, but it happened so quickly that I didn't have time to react. I grabbed Tom to stop him, but I was too late to prevent him from handing Noah over to the doctor waiting by the door. No! No! She didn't even look at me. Suddenly they were gone. My baby was gone. The nurse closed the door behind them. Alice, don't. Let him go, Tom gently advised. I ignored my husband as I tried to get past him to the door. Let me out! Alice, honey, Tom implored. Dr. Sanchez had to take him, you know that. They've given you all the time they could. No! Give me back my baby! I cried out, hitting Tom as he tried to pull me into him. He had to go. We had no choice, Tom whispered as he secured me against my will, restraining my struggling body against his own. I want my baby, Tom! Please! Please! I wailed. I wanted to claw at my skin and gouge at my flesh to rip out the pain which scorched through me like flames. But Tom's powerful arms held me, and his hand pressed my head into his chest as I sobbed and sobbed. But something was wrong. I could feel it in his embrace. A coldness. I could sense his distrust. We had been so happy and so in love. We had carelessly laughed about how nothing could tear us apart. And now? Tom didn't need to articulate the words for me to know what he was thinking. What did you do, Alice? But I couldn't remember. I couldn't remember what had happened. All I could remember was seeing Noah lying there. Chapter 2. Thursday, 3:09 a.m. No. No, how? How? I stared and stared, struggling to process what I was seeing. It made no sense. The walls of the ferry cabin closed in on me. Then the room suddenly lurched. I could feel bile rising up the back of my throat. This isn't real. It can't be. You're hallucinating, Alice. Noah is gone, remember? Remember? This is Eli, not Noah. It has to be Eli. I was still half asleep. I had to be. It was the only rational explanation. The empty blister pack of drugs and the bottle of red wine came to mind. Or was I drugged? It was no wonder I was struggling to make sense of anything. I blinked a couple of times to try to force myself fully awake. But it didn't change anything. I gasped, not understanding what I was still seeing. But I knew it wasn't Eli next to me, it was... Noah. Noah? Terrified, I turned away from the motionless baby, with his eyes closed, his tiny balled fists next to me. He was wearing the Jojo Maman Bebe cotton blue and white striped fox sleep suit that I changed Eli into before we went out. Went out where? My mind was spinning in freefall as I tried to piece the hazy shards of my memory together. But I was scrabbling around in the dark. I had no idea what had happened to me or Eli. The unknown terrified me as much as the known. I dared myself to look back at him. He's not Eli, Alice. Where is your son? Try to remember. My mind felt as sluggish and heavy as my body, as if I was underwater, unable to rise to the surface, pulled down by some invisible force. Then it came back to me, sudden, bright and painful. I could see Eli looking up at me with his trusting grey eyes as I strapped him in his Silver Cross car seat and clipped it onto the pram wheels. I pulled on his baby blue knitted beanie hat, fastened the buttons on his matching blue knitted cardigan, and then tucked his pale blue blanket around him before leaving the cabin and taking him. Taking him where, Alice? Where did you go? But I couldn't remember. I couldn't force it out into the open. It hid in the dark recesses of my mind. What time did you leave, Alice? Think! But that fact evaded me, as did the knowledge of where I went with Eli. I had returned to the cabin, that was obvious. But how long was I gone for? And Eli? I stared at the baby lying on the bed wearing Eli's sleepsuit, horrified. I took in the familiar features. Noah? The last time I had seen Noah was when he was taken from me at the hospital, exactly a year ago to this day. Tom had lifted him from my chest and held him, staring down at our son's unresponsive face before kissing him goodbye and handing him to the waiting medics. I jumped up to stop them, but it was too late. They had conspired to take him from me, refusing to give in to my grief, my primitive instinct never to let him go. And yet here he was, lying next to me on the bed. Alice, stop it. Stop it. This isn't Noah. It can't be. It's all in your head. I reached out, fingers trembling, and touched the hair. Noah's velvety soft baby hair. I let out a strangulated sound as I snatched my fingers away in surprise. I hadn't expected him to be really there, to be tangible. I was certain I was dreaming, or worse, hallucinating. I squeezed my eyes shut against the insanity of what I was seeing. But Noah's beautiful, peaceful expression, his black, thick, fluttery eyelashes resting against his pale skin, flooded my mind. I could see the tiny white milk spots on his perfectly shaped button nose, even the fine, fuzzy peach hair on his cheeks and forehead, stubborn remnants of the lanugo that had covered his soft newborn skin. This wasn't Eli's face. It was his brother's. Noah. But how? A sob escaped from deep inside me. How is this possible? You came back to the cabin, Alice, but what happened to Eli? Where did you go with Eli? I couldn't remember. So much had happened since I woke up to the message on my iPhone on Tuesday morning that changed everything. Panicking, I turned and fumbled around on the small wooden bed unit for my mobile. I yanked it from its charging cable and looked at the screensaver. Eli's face stared back at me. Those dark, grey, contemplative eyes looking up at me, searching my face for answers. But I had none. The time took me by surprise. 3:11 a.m. How was that possible? How had I lost so many hours? I noted numerous missed calls and voicemails from Tom that began after midnight, but my phone was on silent. I couldn't remember doing that. But I couldn't remember most of the evening. I imagined that Tom's discovery of my disappearance with Eli would have thrown him into a state of abject terror. He would have returned home, exhausted after being in surgery for over 12 hours, to the shocking discovery I was gone. I had taken Eli and the car and left, leaving no explanation of where I was heading or why. And the texts, countless texts from Tom, a withheld number also repeatedly called before leaving a voicemail message. The police? A cold shiver embraced my body. No, not Tom. Not my husband. Surely he wouldn't have reported me to the police. Eli was my son. I had every right to take him if I wanted. Admittedly, I hadn't told Tom of my plans. Equally, he hadn't confided in me the mental health assessment that was scheduled to take place today, with 2 psychiatrists and a social worker, after which I would be sectioned against my will. I would lose everything then. For I knew that Tom wouldn't be waiting for me when I was released 4 weeks later. If I was released. He would be gone with Eli. But now I was the one who had disappeared with our son. I let go of my phone, not wanting to find out if Tom had called the police. Not that they could do anything. I was well beyond their reach now. I forced myself to look back down at the baby wearing Eli's sleep suit. The baby who looked identical to Noah. How? This isn't real, Alice. It can't be. You need to remember. Memories started to come back to me, sudden and forceful, making me gasp. I had felt really unwell and discombobulated, as if my body didn't belong to me. When I came back to the cabin, I felt so ill that I struggled to make it to the small ensuite bathroom in time, before being copiously sick. My legs had given way, and I had collapsed on the floor with my head over the toilet bowl. I was aware of passing in and out of consciousness, unable to move my body, let alone call out for help. How long for, I couldn't say. During that time, where was Eli? You left him in the car seat attached to the pram. Remember? Yes. Yes, he was safe. I swallowed as I tried to tug at the delicate thread attached to the memory, fearful of breaking the tenuous connection. But I had no recollection of unclipping him from the car seat and laying him on the cabin bed. Was that before or after you swallowed the pills back with a bottle of wine? The thought hit me hard. Why would I take all those pills with alcohol? They weren't just any pills. I recognized the blister pack as the medication prescribed by Dr. Samuels for my insomnia. I had thrown my medication together, unsure of how long I would be away. I was already taking 10 milligrams of diazepam 4 times a day to reduce my anxiety. To add what appeared to be 80 milligrams of temazepam into the mix was dangerous. I was prescribed 40 milligrams a night as my body was now unresponsive to the original dose of 20 milligrams. And the wine? I knew not to drink alcohol with the temazepam. I knew that if I took more than my prescribed dose or drank alcohol, then I would fall into such a deep sleep I wouldn't hear Eli. And that was my fear, that I wouldn't hear my baby cry out for me. Worse, I could end up never waking up. So why would I do that? I would never use temazepam when I was on my own with Eli. Not after what happened to Noah. I choked back a sob as the image, imprinted in perpetuity in my mind of Noah lying lifeless, suddenly assaulted me. He had been so frighteningly peaceful that I instinctively knew something wasn't right. Why I would take the remaining 4 20-milligram tablets in the blister pack was beyond me. But it would explain my dry mouth, dizziness, and confusion. Unless it was intentional? What happened, Alice? What happened to Eli? Why did you want to overdose? What did you do? Eli? I whispered, staring at the sleeping baby lying on the bed. Confused, I looked across at the Moses basket, parallel with the cabin bed wall for stability. I didn't understand why I hadn't laid him in his basket. Why had I wanted him next to me when I was terrified of him overheating or suffocating in bed with me? The soft blue blanket was still inside. But Eli's teddy bear, which he always slept with, lay discarded at the bottom of the basket. Struggling to understand what I was seeing, I looked back down at Eli. But it wasn't Eli. It was Noah. There was no mistaking that fact. I placed my fingers on his chubby hand, delicately caressing its smooth skin. It was cold, as I feared, just like before. I dared myself to pick him up, the weight of his body surprising me. His arms flopped to his sides, unresponsive, as his tiny hands with minute nails remained clenched. I cradled his head as I bent down and kissed his cheek, inhaling his scent. Noah? But it wasn't Noah I could smell. It was Eli. I pulled back and studied his sleeping form. At first glance, I could be mistaken into thinking this was Eli, as his hair was black like Noah's. But Eli's nose was slightly flatter than Noah's, and his lips a bit fuller, a subtle difference that only a parent's eye could see. And I could see that this wasn't Eli. But he was wearing Eli's sleep suit, which was why he smelled of him. He? Noah? I stared in shock at the baby I held, who looked identical to Noah. Even the eczema flare-up between the red and flaking folds of his neck and wrists was there. And the milk spots, Alice. Look at them on his nose. How is this possible? Eli's skin was unblemished. He had no dry, flaky eczema patches or milk spots on his nose, nor did he have black, peach, fuzzy hair covering his cheeks and forehead. Unlike this baby I was holding. Again, my mind attempted to rationalize the situation, with the suggestion I was still deep asleep or experiencing some drug-induced hallucination. But I could feel the weight of this baby in my arms. He felt real. What is happening to me? I muttered. Unsure as to whether I was imagining all of this, I knew there was one way to determine whether this was Eli. I gently laid him down on the bed. I shakily breathed in to steady myself before fumbling with trembling fingers at his sleep suit and vest to see whether the hemangioma on the left side of Eli's chest was there. It had appeared a few days after birth, as a small crimson dot, and then had grown exponentially in the following weeks to a significantly raised red lump on his skin filled with blood vessels. We were advised that it would get more prominent for the first 6 to 12 months, and then start to shrink. Fingers trembling, I pulled the vest top to the side. Gasping, I stared in disbelief at the smooth, unblemished flesh. There was no sign of a hemangioma. None at all. Come on, Alice, you must be dreaming. Wake up! I squeezed my eyes shut and dug my nails deep into my palms to bring myself back to reality. I waited, willing this all to be a dream. I opened my eyes and stared back down in confusion at the baby still lying next to me. The baby that wasn't Eli and looked like... Oh my God, Alice, what is happening to you? Then I thought of Eli's eye colour. It was a rare dark grey, the same as mine, whereas Noah's eyes were so dark they appeared black, like his father's. But the baby's eyes are closed, Alice. I needed him to open his eyes. I needed to look into his deep, dark grey eyes to centre myself. I gently shook him, but he didn't stir. Come on, Eli. Please. Don't scare me. Wake up, I pleaded. But he didn't react. I broke out in a cold sweat as the room began to spin, making me nauseous. I snatched him up, held him against my chest, and rocked backwards and forwards, trying to block out what was happening. I was terrified I was losing my mind. I needed Dr. Samuels. I thought of calling her, but what would I say? That I had taken Eli and run? Worse, I had fled the country with my baby and was on a ship heading for Europe, and had awoken in the middle of the night to discover that I had lost him. Eli. And the unimaginable had happened. I was now holding Noah. But how was that even possible? Alice, what have you done? What has happened to Eli? Chapter 3. 1 year earlier. How is she? Questioned Barbara. Shh, hissed Tom. I'm just checking that she's still asleep. I don't want her disturbed. She can't hear us, darling. I could hear them, though, despite my mother-in-law's assumption. Not that I wanted to. I wanted them to go away and leave me alone in the miasma of despair that clung to my skin. I know. But Tom was then silent. How long will the effects of the lorazepam injection they gave her at the hospital last? I heard Tom give a low sigh. She slept now for 16 hours. The dose she was given could make her sleep for 2 days straight. I hope so for Alice's sake. I've never seen her like that. It was... He broke off. How? How was it possible that I had slept for so long? What had happened to me? My body felt so heavy, as did my head. I tried to fit together the fragmented pieces of my memory, but every time I went back there, to the claustrophobic blue hospital family room with the clock on the wall, my mind went blank. Beyond the blue room, some unspeakable truth lurked, waiting to destroy me, to take what was left of me. I could feel my fragility as if I were a hollow shell that would shatter into 1,000 bits, pierced by the wrong word. Shouldn't she have stayed in hospital so that they could monitor her? Asked Barbara. I opted to discharge her. I know, Alice. It would be the last thing she would want. She needs us, and she needs somewhere safe. His Moses basket and other things, though? Don't you think that will distress her when she wakes up? I don't know, all right? I've never been in this situation. All I know is I lost my son yesterday. I'm trying to keep it together for you and Dad, and especially Alice. She'll need all the support she can get when she finally wakes up. Christ, Mom! This doesn't happen to people like us. I mean, Noah was so well taken care of. So loved. How? A painful silence followed. I gasped as searing white pain tore through me, as the memory of what had happened to Noah, my baby, came back to me. I waited to see whether they realized I was awake, even though I couldn't move my body or open my eyes. Not that I wanted to be conscious. Not here. Not now. Not ever. Not without. Noah. Without Noah, what's left for me? Oh, darling, I wish I could say something to make it right, Barbara whispered. I just don't understand it either. I mean, there'll be an investigation, surely, so we'll have answers. I could feel her red-rimmed eyes boring into me, searching for those answers. I knew she had been crying from her hoarse and cracked voice, as had Tom. I couldn't cry. My body was too numb, too disconnected from my thoughts, and I knew if I started crying, I would never stop. What exactly happened, Tom? Did she tell you? I waited for his answer. Had I told him? No. No, she hasn't been able to talk about it. I mean, after I found her and Noah, she was in a state of shock. She couldn't accept that he was... His voice trembled as pain punctuated his words. Silence followed, heavy, awkward, foreboding. The air in the room was oppressive, which was how I knew they were still here, watching me sleep. But I wasn't sleeping. I was painfully aware. Her mother, Barbara began. I could hear the incrimination in her voice. My mother? But my mother was... A stab of betrayal coursed through me. I realized my brother, Ollie, must have said something to Tom. But when? Or had I said something? I couldn't recall. But why had Tom shared something so private, so personal with his parents? Do you think what happened? No. Tom immediately cut her off, an unfamiliar edge to his voice. I'm just pointing out the obvious, she retaliated. I should never have told you, Tom muttered. Well, it's too late for that. I still don't understand why. Why what? Tom questioned. The rush, you and... She faltered as if she had said too much. Again, I felt her eyes burning my skin, peeling back the layers. searching for the unspeakable. You had everything here, Tom. I'm still struggling to come to terms with your decision to go back to the UK, then to marry Alice so quickly, and as for Blair— Don't, Tom snapped. Alice doesn't know about her, does she? Barbara questioned, surprised. I wondered why you have been so on edge since you arrived. I tried to recall how long we had been here. I only remembered arriving on Monday afternoon at Boston Logan International Airport. The late October sun had been so intense it had momentarily blinded me when I'd stepped outside. The white rays had caressed my skin, filling me with joy and hope of a new beginning for the three of us. And now, Alice, there's only two of you. I was terrified to travel. I'd feared that the plane would crash over the Atlantic Ocean, plummeting into the deepest and darkest waiting water, never to be found again, taking everything from me. But we had somehow survived the non-stop 7-hour and 45-minute flight from Heathrow to Boston. I didn't question how or why. I just took it as a sign that I had outrun my past. I now had a future with my husband and baby son on a different continent. I couldn't have got further away from her if I had tried. But it was all lies. I had been cruelly fooled into believing that I had escaped. Noah? Noah? He's gone, Alice. I blocked the thought. Tom's parents, Barbara and William, had met us and taken me into their embrace and their brilliant lives as if I had always belonged. The car journey back to Marblehead had passed in a blur of excitement, as the promise of new beginnings enchanted us. The Fitzpatrick's son had finally returned to them, bringing with him a wife and much-anticipated grandson. I had been seduced into believing that this new world was safe. When the following morning had arrived, the dazzling sun had reached through the guest bedroom's glass doors to the veranda, which overlooked the tennis courts below and the Atlantic Ocean beyond, fooling me into believing everything was perfect. If only for a second. For that was all it took for me to realize that it was all lies. That something was wrong. So very wrong. And that was when? Only yesterday morning. I recalled the empty blue hospital room, then the panic that ensued after Tom had taken my baby from me. I was inconsolable, unable to cope with the anguish of being separated from Noah. The screams inside my body, my head were relentless, over and over, drowning everything and everyone out. 16 hours, Tom had said. 16 hours when I had no recollection of Noah. Their voices infiltrated my thoughts again. She didn't need to know. It would have destroyed her. Alice would only blame herself if she knew. Isn't she to blame? Barbara questioned. No, Tom hissed. Of course she isn't. Now isn't the time, Mom. And you don't think she would find out now you're back here? Barbara continued, ignoring him. I mean, she's still a part of our lives, Tom. You can't just pretend she doesn't exist. What you did was— I know. All right, Tom interjected. I planned on telling Alice at some point. But not now. Not after. I waited. I had no idea who she was or why he had kept her a secret. Their floating words began to fall like burning ash upon my lifeless body. I couldn't move, even if I wanted to escape them. I wanted to fade into oblivion, where the suffocating, scorching pain of reality couldn't find me. Perhaps this is only a nightmare. When you awaken, none of this will be true. Noah will still be with you, Alice. I just don't understand what happened, Tom, Barbara whispered conspiratorially. Noah was a healthy baby. You're a neurosurgeon, and Alice is a nurse. So how could he have possibly— Her sharp voice pierced me like poisonous darts, forcing me back into the present, crushing my hope that this wasn't real. Her hushed accusation hung in the air around me, circling me, goading me. I wanted to scream at her that I didn't do anything to harm Noah. I loved him more than life itself. I would do anything for him. But was I terrified I had done something wrong? That I was in some way responsible? Oh God, Alice. Maybe if you hadn't fallen asleep breastfeeding Noah in bed, then maybe he wouldn't have... I couldn't think it. I couldn't accept the unacceptable. That my baby was gone, and maybe it was my fault. The crashing waves outside drowned out their words. Water haunted my dreams and waking life. Ironically, I'd run to London from my childhood coastal village in Devon to escape from the torment of the Atlantic Ocean.